much for being here. I want to start by introducing our great panelists, and then we'll get the show started. First things first, though, it's a live podcast. Laugh, cry if you have to. You can be loud, you can make noise. Like, I want it to feel like we have real people here in the audience, so don't worry about being super quiet. But without further ado, our very first guest is a dear friend of mine. I met her when my husband and I were living in Canada. I had zero friends, literally, like none at all. And this woman embraced me. She let me be my authentic self, silly and all the things. And so Jess Muamba, please welcome her. So Jess is a mother of three, a wife, content creator, a dear special friend of mine who has gone through the Butterfly Season Journal and is going to be sharing her transformation with us today. Coming up next is another dear friend of mine. Janay and I go back from college, literally 2011, babies who thought we were grown. And now we're wives, adults, running businesses now, right? Doing big girl things. So she'll be also on panel today, also has gone through the Butterfly Season Transformation Journal. So please welcome Janay. Janay is co-founder of DM Collective, which is an influencer marketing ad agency. So amazing work that she does. And then our next guest is Jacqueline Renee. She is a wellness transformation coach, founder of Release. She and I will be putting on an event coming up in a few weeks called the Release into Butterfly Season. Please welcome Jacqueline. So Release into Butterfly Season is this process that she has. I went there, she invited me, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And she's like, yeah, we're just gonna release stored trauma in the body. I'm like, okay, cool, not knowing what's what. And so I'm there, we're dancing, yelling, raging, and I'm like, okay, this is a great experience. And she's like, the aftercare is really important. There's a delayed onset of the stuff that you're working on. I'm like, okay, cool. Get home, and I'm like, why am I crying? What is happening? So she and I will be facilitating a workshop together that's going to be transformational. You'll go through the release method, and then to help you land safely, you'll go through the Butterfly Season Transformation Journal so you have something to integrate. So please give a warm welcome to my amazing guest. Yeah. So I want to share with you guys a little bit about the intention of this live podcast. I authored the Butterfly Season Transformation Journal, and some of you guys may relate, you're kind of going through it, and I was looking for everything. At the time, I didn't realize what I was looking for, but I was looking for things to sidestep the transformation. I thought I could meditate my way through the hard work. I thought I could manifest my way through it. I thought I could set my intentions, burn it, and all of the things through my way through the transformation, which is truly the work. And I started to get frustrated because I'm I have all this awareness. I understand what's happening in my life right now. I understand my negative coping mechanisms, my habits, my relation to the chaos that is my life. But my reality's not changing. And what I realized was it's you can have awareness, but awareness without action, nothing changes. And so if you don't have the actual steps to facilitate that action, and when I say actual steps, I mean what are your coping mechanisms? What are the trauma responses that you have? And not from a retroactive place, but a proactive place. What scenarios do I get into that have me act a certain way that I may not have picked up on before? But when I'm in them, after I'm already in the shit, I'm oh, I did it again, right? So through that process of discovering that within myself, I use the framework in the Butterfly Season Transformation Journal to help facilitate so that you have a more proactive approach to your own healing journey. You can match it with awareness. And don't get me wrong, I love meditation. I love, yoga. I love all of the things that help with awareness, breath work. I love it all. I think they're great tools for awareness. But without that action piece, literally your reality will never fucking change. So the guided journal is action to help you facilitate that thing. And what we're going to go through today with these women is what their transformation has looked like. I feel with transformations in general, it's helpful to see other people's journey because they might have something or be going through something that you might also be going through, and to see how they've overcome it, because we're all so different, but also the same in so many ways, is what helps ignite transformation in other people. You guys ready? Yes. Beautiful. Jess, I want to ask you first, I want to talk about alchemy. Alchemy is like transmuting something from something else, right? When I went through the journal, I built the journal. You guys will laugh. I wrote the journal, and I never took myself through the framework. I was like, which is very avoidant, right? I'm like, oh, I can take you. You need help? You need help? You need help? Thinking, like, and all my friends are like, yep, I'm a victim of the framework. Thinking like, if I can help someone, then that'll help me. But really, like, you got to help yourself. Anyways, so you work through one energy into another. And when I finally did the framework on myself, I was in deep grief. My husband and I had just went through a loss of a miscarriage. And I went through it, and I realized that, like, within grief, it helped me transmute the delusion of what I thought was actually going on in my life to actually sit into what's actually going on. What am I avoiding that I think I'm actually dealing with, but by dealing with things around it and not the actual thing. So when you went through the journal, was there anything that you feel like was a revelation for you, something that you transmuted from one thing to the next?
Great. So speaking on grief, I realized through the journal, I had physical grief that I was dealing with, like very literal grief in the sense of the loss of my mom 4 years ago. But I realized a common theme was I was grieving a lot of changed relationships. So there was a lot of metaphorical grief as well. And through going through the process of bringing a lot of the things in my subconscious to the forefront of my mind, I would say that the transmuting went from grief to giving myself grace. And I realized that when grief hits you, there's so much victimization and a lot of self-inflicted pain of I should have done this different, I could have, I would have, and just releasing and giving myself grace that what I did at the time was the best that I could do at that time, and then letting it go and flow into grace.
Beautiful. Janay, what about you?
Mine is very interesting. When Aisha was writing this journal, we would go on like these Friday walks every single week, and she would, just throw her ideas at me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know the answer. Like for me, I think when I actually did the journal, I was like, oh, there's actually a lot here that I've never unpacked, even outside of therapy. For me, I thought it was going to be very obvious. I'm like the oldest daughter, grew up dancing. Any dancers in here? You get a performer. And I didn't realize that really like translated in every area of my life. I think that was the biggest thing. So transmuting performing like growing up for an audience, and then performing for my parents, good grades, making the dance teams, you name it. I didn't realize that was in literally every other area of my life until I did the journal.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I know Jess too, but the three of us grew up performing, dance, good grades, all the things. And a lot of people will praise you for things that are kind of trauma responses, like praise you for people pleasing. They'll praise you for how great you are at entrepreneurship, how hard you work. And I'm like, I'm working 18-hour days, but it's only because my worth is tied to this business. Like, it's not actually because I'm doing it because I'm in alignment.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like by the level of laughter, we all might dealing with some of the same things. Jacqueline, how does transmutation look like for you with the journal?
Yeah, it was interesting because when you gifted the journal and I met you at the at Kaleidoscope for the smoothie, I started just randomly talking about how this situation where I lost the good guy. It was like, the one that gets away. And we started talking about it, and she was like, you should use that for your situation in the journal. And I was like, oh, this just doesn't feel like deep enough. It doesn't feel like, I lost my mom or got a divorce, moved, something deeper needs to come out. Once I started writing about that, I started realizing how I was closing myself off from these relationships. It was my own fault. And I was like, oh, I'm writing it. I'm like, goodness gracious, like this is really eye-opening. You start to really understand. For me, the transmuting was, how am I contributing to this? Like I want something and I see it, it's right there. And then it's out of my reach, or I lose it, or it doesn't work out the way I desire it to. how am I contributing to it? And so that was the biggest transmuting process for me was it's awareness now. I can see where I'm contributing to it.
Yeah. So the journal has 13 exercises and they all compound on one another. They're journal prompts. So it's not like you can just open the book one day, start one journal prompt, and then just kind of flow through it. It's really like from start to finish. And the very beginning of the journal, we talk about feelings and the importance of feelings, because the way your brain works, like the very first time an event happens, you create a neural pathway. And then anytime feelings or circumstances that match that event, you just follow the same pattern. So if that pattern was like a flawed pattern or a fucked up one, then like chances are when the next series of events that come, you're going to just follow what you did the very first time. The best way to kind of map that out is through feelings. What did you feel in that moment? And so when I mentioned to Jacqueline and we were talking about, you know, how to find like your divine masculine man, a partner that is like really your equal energy exchange, your match, your soulmate. And we were talking about how the good one got away. I'm like, oh my God, use that. Like, because things on the surface seem really small. And then when you go deeper, you're like, well, there's a lot of shit here. It's not about the good guy, probably. So I want to unpack feelings. When you started in the journal and you have to map your feelings, were there any surprises that came through with the event that you talked about? If you don't mind unpacking what situation you started with, and then what feelings did you correlate with that event? Were you aware of them in the beginning?
I was shocked at I wish we had the feelings wheel up here now so we could like point to it. But, you know, at first you think it's going to be sadness. I'm sad that it didn't work out. And then I'm also disappointed in like nothing coming through. And then also like, okay, what happened from there? Because that was a couple of years ago. So where are we headed towards now? But once I started looking into the parent feelings and stuff, it was a lot more hurt than I imagined, a little bit of anger that was coming up, but it was more pointed at me versus him. And so that was surprising to me. You think it's one feeling, but a lot of times it's reoccurring into something else.
Yeah. And Janay, what about you? Do you want to share a little bit about like what event you talked about? Actually, let me pause there.
Okay.
So in the journal, I asked you to like focus on an event. Any event that maybe didn't sit right with you, you start wherever you want to start. And then you allow that event to kind of guide you through the entire journal process. So when Jacqueline talks about the one that got away, that's kind of what she's working through. See, where did the initial neural pathway start? What feelings came up for her? Then now in other relationships, how does she mirror that same dynamic with men? So Janay, do you want to share with us a little bit about like what event you started with and then what feelings started to come up when you started the journal?
Sure. My event, to give everyone backstory, my husband and I have been together since college, since we've all known each other. And so with that, you know, you have to evolve in a relationship as time goes on. He had a specific career. He played football, and it created a lot of turmoil in our extended family, like outside of our unit. So there were situations that I used in the journal that were tricky to navigate because people pleaser. I'm like, why is there always so much conflict? Like, I'm doing all the things right. I'm, you know, making sure everyone's included and a part of like our events and things. And like, I still am hitting the same wall over and over again. And then I did this journal and I'm like, oh, girl, this is not a you thing. You're feeling sadness because you can't please someone who cannot be pleased by you. Like, it's not about you. But it took me so long. I had to do like multiple scenarios that I was like coming to the same realization over and over again. So for me, it was like sadness at first. And then it was like, oh, you got to let that go. It's actually not. I think it's sadness and like a little bit bitterness because you feel like you're doing the right things, but you're not getting the right outcome. So I felt a lot of different feelings. And ultimately, I think when you release it is when it doesn't become your problem anymore.
Yeah. I love that Janay mentioned how you feel like you're doing the right things, but you don't get the right outcome or the outcome that you intended. That's like was the conflict with this journal. I felt like I'm following these steps, but my reality isn't changing. Why are my intentions not matching my outcomes? Why are the things that I'm trying to manifest, that I'm praying for, that I'm working towards, aren't actually coming to fruition? And what I realized, I also too am like, I think before I would say it as like a badge of honor because it was like a cool thing to say. I'm as the entrepreneur girl. He's like, I'm a recovering people pleaser. But it's like, are you really doing anything about it? I definitely wasn't. But you think, you know, we talked about like getting praise for your like trauma responses and getting praise when you people please. People would be like, wow, you're so empathetic. You're so great. You're so caring. You always think of everyone else. Gosh, it's such like commendable thing. And like, I'm just like, no, I really just can't stomach you being uncomfortable with this. So like, I need to do everything to make sure you're comfortable because I could be comfortable. But really, like you notice that like I'm just self-abandoning along the way.
Yeah.
I'm not focusing on my own needs. I'm so worried about everyone else's needs in the room that I will do whatever and self-abandon whatever so that you could be fine. So if you're fine, then I'm fine. But that I'm not like running my own race, right? So, Jess, when it comes to some of the emotions that came up for you, what did that look like?
Oh, it was surprising to me that disappointment was such a recurring theme in every event and every situation that I spoke of. And I think one of the biggest events that I unpacked in the journal was my mom's passing. And with that, I was disappointed. There was so much disappointment in that. So I was disappointed by God that God didn't decide to heal her from COVID. I was then disappointed at the way people handled grief that hurt me. I was then disappointed at the expectations that I had for others to step up in her position and that fell through. So I realized there was this chronic state of disappointment in relationships, in physical mortality, in spiritual upbringing. I grew up in a very religious household. I unpacked a lot of how that influenced me and why I thought that when you do this, like if you are the good girl that goes to church every Sunday and you fast and you pray and you read your Bible, it equals a non-tumultuous life. And so because I had that false expectation, I realized that I actually set myself up for disappointment because that's not life. And so it was really freeing to see that reoccurring pattern was something that I could change simply by shifting my expectation of other people, that same level of high expectation, shifting that, adjusting it accordingly, and then being like, you have the power to set expectations for yourself on how to be better and how to overcome this so it's not a constant recurring theme in your life.
That's so beautiful. One thing that Jess mentioned was like a level of accountability with the role that you play. Like when you hear all the things that she's talking about, you hear her say like, I'm disappointed in how family showed up when my mom passed. I'm disappointed in how people handled grief. I'm disappointed. And it's a lot of like this. But what I realized, anytime I'm having a conversation with someone and I start like speaking like this, where like it's just pointed at someone else, I'm like, oh no, it starts here. What did accountability look like, Janay, in your journey? Where was accountability in what you discovered in unpacking your situation?
I think accountability for me, I mean, it looks different in every different scenario, but ultimately it's changing my expectations. It's deciding what my intent is. Like, is my intention pure, or is it for a reaction, or is it to like check the checkbox so that I'm doing all of the right things? Am I performing? That is typically what my accountability looks like. And I'm always like, oh, it's really not. It's not coming from a place of being genuine. It's like, oh, I'm trying to people please to avoid conflict. So that's typically what accountability looks like for me, honestly. And then shifting my expectations so that I don't feel disappointed or upset with how other people react, because ultimately it's an inside job.
Right. The accountability piece I feel like was really hard for me, because it's like once you see yourself in one scenario, you see yourself in so many other scenarios. And then I'm like, dude, I'm just with myself. I like can't even help it. Yeah. I do. Lindsay and I do a dance class every Monday, and I've been working on being present in my body. So the really beautiful thing about the journal is that it helps you figure out right relation with other people. So, you know, I was like, when you start to talk like this, when it's like a pointed conversation, the journal helps you like reframe your involvement in it. There's 2 people or 3 or whomever you're working on the journal with, meaning whoever's impacting you, they have involvement too, but the accountability and the change starts here. And so when I started to work on my own accountability, I realized that like I constantly emotionally monitor rooms that I'm in. And I didn't realize that I was doing it. I wasn't realizing what feeling was coming up for me to emotionally monitor the room. I can map it out on a journal, but when it came to like real life application, I just like wasn't entirely sure. So with the journal, now I'm working on being present in my body, like in the actual moment. How am I feeling right now? Like right now, I'm like a little hot, my pits are a little bit sweaty. Okay, like I'm understanding like where I'm at energetically. So I try to do that a lot because then I can feel the feelings that are coming up and then I can deal with the emotional landscape so that I'm proactive. Now in dance class, I'm usually never emotionally riled up there. I'm having the best time. It's so much fun. We're like laughing. And if you guys know Big Kid Rick, like you're like twerking on the floor. You're like doing all the things. If it's your birthday, he'll throw money at you. It's like chaotic, but very fun. Very dance, fitness, workout class, a lot of fun. And there was one moment I was like, wait, it was mid-class. And I'm like, why am I not feeling good? I don't like how I feel right now. What happened? What changed? And there was a girl, you know, like, are there any dancers in here? Okay. So, you know, like when you, like the mirror is a thing, your relation to where the mirror is at, your relation to the front row, like that's a thing. So I'm dancing and then I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling great. And then I noticed that the girl that was next to me got her spot taken by someone else. And so she was in the corner, no longer in front of the mirror. And I was like riled up by that because I can see that she wasn't feeling good. I didn't even know that I knew that. I was like, what changed in my emotional state? I'm looking around, I'm like, what changed? And I see her in the corner and I'm like, oh, part of me wants to be like, hey girl, can you move? Because it was her spot. But that's not my responsibility. That's her responsibility to advocate for herself to get back in the seat. But I would self-abandon, get out of my own alignment. Now I'm fighting with a girl I don't even know to help another girl and get her spot back, right? So that's the beauty of like understanding these emotions, because now I know that I emotionally monitor rooms so that people could feel better in the room, but that's not my responsibility. And then I can just course correct and go back to like twerking in front of the mirror. Jacqueline, talk to me about what did accountability look like for you?
Yeah. When you were talking about blame, pointing the finger and turning it around, there were multiple times, and I say this in the nicest way possible, do your journal, multiple times where I felt like I was swallowing hard glass. It was like, that was really hard to really identify about myself. And, 41 years old, I've done a lot of work and I'm still like, oh my gosh, there is so much more to unpack. And this is the reason why I'm not getting what I desire. And so the accountability was tough love at first. It felt uncomfortable. It had me hot with my pits sweating too. But then eventually it was like, wow, if I can really replant this, if I can really work through this, then getting what I desire seems so much easier. And one thing, like I study a lot of feminine, masculine energy, and I just learned this like a few months ago that accountability is actually a masculine quality, yet so many women hold themselves accountable, hold other people accountable, and it just pushes us into this role that we're not necessarily meant to constantly abide by. So that was my awareness on that, and it was so powerful.
Interesting. So what does that look like then from the masculine and feminine approach if, the yin and yang of both is great balance, right? The tension between the two. And if accountability is a very masculine approach, what does the equal counterpart look like from a feminine approach?
Sure. And just so we're aware, I'm not an expert with this, but here's what I'm learning and growing into is, the feminine is there to rise the situation, to invite and call in, versus this is what you should be doing and this is how you should be doing it. And if you're not doing it, like it's starting to trigger me, and what happens after. Where, when men with accountability, it's more from a grounded place, it's, actionable. And with women, we can say, okay, I'm going to invite you to come in to claim your spot in front of the mirror, but I'm not going to be accountable for your feelings for it. I'm just using that as an example.
So that would look like me being like, homegirl, get your spot back.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can call her in. Yeah.
The invitation.
Yeah.
But that's not.
Yeah.
Got it.
You can tilt the crown back up, but you don't want to like fully replace that. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I want to talk to you guys about is fear. Typically what comes up when you're noticing, okay, these are the patterns that I'm creating. This is like the coping mechanism that I do. Like for Janay, it was people pleasing. For me, it's like emotionally monitoring. But before the fear is some sort of coping mechanism, what coping mechanism did you realize that you employed anytime you would butt up against the fear that like grief brought up or the disappointment?
So physiologically, and I know this, like our brains operate in schemas, cognitive schemas. So something happens to us, we create this little like filing drawer in our minds. And then subconsciously, when we feel that something similar is happening again, we subconsciously reach back into that filing cabinet and utilize the same experiences, the same skills we acquired from that to react to the same situation. And hence why recurring themes and behaviors, and hence why the book was so, I'm like, oh, I love this science, like, because it makes sense, because this is how our brains work, cognitive schema. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm aware that my subconscious is trained to use old information for new scenarios. And that doesn't make sense. We don't do that. We never use old software for a new phone. We never use an old engine for a new car. But our brains are subconsciously making us do this. And so with that, I was just like, okay, I have to force myself to use new information. Why do I not want to use new information for new scenarios? And it was because I was protecting the comfortability of sitting in my unmet needs. So there was comfort in my unmet needs because it kept the peace, right? Because we're all recovering people pleasers, and it's so funny to hear everybody's different circumstances and events, because that's what it is. So if you are comfortable in your unmet needs not being met, because that means everybody else stays happy, then it is difficult to confront the fact that you need your needs to be met as well. And so as a mother of 3, I had to bypass that fear of seeming like I'm not this selfless, perfect person, and be like, oh, sometimes it's okay to quote unquote be selfish, and recreate my cognitive schemas of self-abandonment, and recreate my cognitive schemas of making sure I avoid conflict in order to make everybody comfortable. And so I think the biggest thing was, like you were saying before, the action of now rewiring my brain to actually serve me, which is something that I realized from a childhood to all the scenarios I wrote in the book, I did not do.
That's beautiful. What about for you?
A lot of what she said, I think moms in the room, you probably are all like, yes. Very easy to sometimes abandon ourselves. It really, I hate saying it out loud, but that is the biggest thing that comes up for me, is like the biggest question that I ask myself, like, am I abandoning myself by making sure everyone else's needs are met? Am I afraid of the outcome of maybe having to have a little bit of a conversation, because otherwise I'm just trying to please everyone else besides myself? What does that look like when you have a child that it's really important that they have their family around and they get all of the experiences that they deserve, but maybe, your needs are not being met, or you're not really being included in the equation? If that makes sense. I think that's really where the fear sits. And I always just have to ask myself, it might be scary, it might feel uncomfortable, but as long as I'm not abandoning myself is key.
It's so interesting because when you take new action, the fear does come up. And mine, from people pleasing, it's like you're trying to avoid conflict. You think that if we keep the peace and I'll keep community, and like there's a lot of women in this room, and like primally we were like raising children in villages, like everybody was involved. There was like a communal aspect to everything. And so it kind of goes against our nature to like create the conflict, because what does that mean with you in relation to the community, or in relation to your friendships, or in relation to your family, or relation to your partner? when I started to do the work on not self-abandoning, speaking up for my needs, like this is what I want, or instead of being like, well, what do you want to eat? I don't know, whatever you want. And really knowing like, oh, I can really go for some Chipotle right now, but I feel like the collective might want something else, right? And just not wanting to go against that, what I realized is that my fear was abandonment. And I was just so scared that everyone was going to leave. Like after I did the release method with Jacqueline, I was working on, abandonment. And then I got home and my husband had removed expectation for me on something, which is performance, where he's like, oh, I don't care that you do that or not. And then I was like, I feel like you're going to leave me. And he was like, okay, what? But like, that's just the fear. That's why I perform for worth. That's why I people please, because I just want to keep my circle. But I'm like so far pushed out of trying to keep this whole circle together that like I've lost myself in the process. So what does that look like for you? What was the fear that was coming up when you were going through the process, Jacqueline?
For me, coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
So when I was going through the coping mechanisms, I was like, all right, let's really see what comes up. So I feel like, okay, I've done so much work around this. What am I still holding on to? And I start going through, in the journal, you have a current situation. I went through multiple. Some people did it differently. Some did one situation at a time, went through all the steps. I personally did multiple situations at a time. I would not recommend that.
Recommend that.
And then I was like, okay, wow, coping mechanism. I was like, you know what? Let me organize these in an Excel sheet. And I thought you would like that, Lindsay. I really did. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, clearly my coping mechanism is to control and organize everything around me. It's a really nice Excel sheet if you ever want to see it. Color-coded and everything. Color-coded. But it really like shine a light on me because I have a lot of healthy habits. But there's a point where healthy habits can become unhealthy mentally and physically. And so what I realize is my process isn't to necessarily avoid. It isn't necessarily to get triggered and say something bad. It maybe isn't even inflicting pain on myself, but it's to maybe potentially obsess over getting to a certain level with my health or doing more, like making an Excel sheet at 8 p.m. on a Friday while I'm going through a journal, instead of just saying like, oh, I observed that, let me take a bath and go to bed, sleep on it, journal. I had to like bust it out. So that was really eye-opening for me and a huge part of where I am glad I went through multiple at the same time, because I saw the control in each scenario, no matter what, like from across the board, little things and big things.
Yeah. I love that you brought up this scenario. So if any of you guys have the journal, it asks you to start with an event. And a lot of people will start with multiple events and it can get overwhelming. Yeah. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm the problem times 25. And it's helpful to start with one. After you go through the process a second time, you kind of know the lay of the land and you can kind of like work through it. It's definitely like a roller coaster. My husband this was the phrase that he used. It's like a roller coaster. Like it's a slow ride up, but then you're up, you're like, oh my God, get me out of here. And then it like guides you back down in terms of integration. So 10 out of 10 recommend starting with one. And then if you feel comfortable, you can like ramp up how many other events that you use. But to Jacqueline's point, when you do multiple, you'll notice that there's similarities even in these events. And when she's talking about control, I didn't even realize, like if someone were to tell me that I was a control freak, I'd be like, no. But like people pleasing, control. Emotionally monitoring the room, control. Codependency, control. Like I'm just trying to control the room so that I could feel good. And just as a byproduct, you might feel good, right? But like I'm just trying to make sure that I'm fine in here. But that's not how you make yourself fine, right? By trying to control other people. So I love that you brought that up because it showed me that like I do a lot of things to try to control that are guised in other coping mechanisms. What was the hardest thing that you had to do in terms of integration? Because we're talking about a lot of awareness, right? There's actual action that has to be taking place. It might be in dating, it might be in familial relationships, it might be in friendships. What difficult action did you have to take that you felt like you had to take? Did you take it? Did you not take it after the awareness that you found in the journal?
Whoa, so it's so funny that you said like you recommend starting with one event, because how many did you do? The academic in me was like, oh, like my performance is tied to my work. It's like, I'm going to fill up every single thing. The whole thing. Yeah, because I have to. This is what makes me valuable. So going back to that, and going back to integration, and going back to awareness into action, I realized like as I was going through the themes of like cocoon season, caterpillar season, and obviously butterfly season, I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of like the death and resurrection of Jesus, and how like it was followed by like redemption, and then how after like the very next book in the Bible is called Acts, because the apostles were acting on now this newfound sense of awareness of who they were with that entire time. And so like as I was delving into that, I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is my awareness. This is my aha moment. Like
Your Acts season.
in my Acts season, right? I moved from the gospel to Acts. and so yeah, as I was moving into, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to have uncomfortable conversations with people before I sabotage the relationship, because I avoid these uncomfortable conversations where I don't let people know that I am feeling disappointed. I don't give them a chance to explain themselves. I assume, and then I create these scenarios in my head from my past cognitive schemas, right, to new people. And then I'm just like, oh, I don't want to talk to them anymore. Like, they're not good people. I don't feel good around them. Bad vibes. All chalking up to bad vibes. Like, you are the common denominator. And so with that awareness, like my poor husband, I'm like, I'm just going to let you know everything that you do that bothers me right up. But going back to that, finding the balance between, of course, not, attacking people and giving people the grace to be human, but allowing yourself to express how you feel in a manner in which you can leave that conversation and be like, I respected them and I didn't abandon myself. Yeah, that's it.
That was really hard for me. I had a very difficult conversation, and it wasn't actually difficult in practice. It was just difficult for me to muster up the courage to actually do it with a friend of mine. And she had told me, in order for us to be our most authentic selves, we have to have these conversations over the table. And I thought that was so beautiful, because you think like people pleasing or like controlling and all the things are like, I'm trying to protect the relationship. And they're like, not stirring the pot. Like, I don't want to bring up this. But like, the way you actually protect a relationship is by like having a vulnerable and honest conversation, and that you guys move through that. That was the most powerful realization when I did start to take action that was not self-abandoning me and not allowing myself to like compart my own feelings, thoughts, emotions into what I think they think, but I think they think. And now I've made a decision like, oh, you're bad vibes, I'm not talking anymore. But it's like, girl, this is all just a novella in your head. Like, none of this is none of it's real. And none of it's real. What type of hard scenario, Jacqueline, did you have to go through when you had your awareness?
I had to release the control, and it was my 45th time learning how to release the control. So I was like, all right, well, here's what I've done every other time to release the control. And I will say, I feel like now there's so much information being plugged at you all the time. Like, oh, I got to be in my feminine, so I should do it this way. Or I got to be in my masculine for this, I should do it this way. And it's so confusing to figure out like how you want to be, that we can get so far from our truest authentic self. And I think what I've realized is that I did it however somebody told me I should have done it, that I maybe put on a pedestal or respected in that frame, since I'm not the expert in that. Okay, if this person is the expert, that sounds good, maybe I should do that. Or that sounds good, maybe I should do that. With the journal, it's like, no, this is you, and this is how you should be doing it. So now you have your own awareness, your own enlightenment, and you can do this on your own. You don't need anyone to tell you what you need to do. So, but by the 45th time of releasing control, I got to do it my way. And my way was actually so much more gentler than I felt like any other way. So I didn't really have to go through too bad of a process where it was like, oh my gosh, this is uncomfortable. I actually just felt more of a relief that I just got to be myself and do it the way I wanted to do it, which was awesome.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Janay, what about you?
Yeah, mine's very similar. I think as like very type A, control freak, all the things, I'm the mom, I'm the wife. I have to do like X, Y, and Z so that everyone's needs are met and to make sure I'm communicating to everyone. And I'm like, that's my job. And so for integration for me was like, no, sit down. Let someone else handle it this time. It's not for you, like not your circus. Let other people like be in control of their emotions and their own situations. You don't have to mediate. You're not the ref. Like it's not on your plate to even do that. And once I just stopped stopped the wheels from turning, I was like, oh, it's much nicer on this side. Why haven't I done this sooner? So it wasn't really actionable things. It was really just like
Inaction.
trusting that I wasn't going to be abandoned if I didn't do it, you know?
Yeah, that's so good. It's so, I love that you two have like an inaction standpoint. We had an action standpoint because it goes to show you that, like, to Jacqueline's point, I'm guilty of it too. I do put a lot of people who I feel like know more, been through more, sound like they can speak the verbiage, like what they say is like best. And so then I do that thing, but then I'm outsourcing my own knowing that I could find in myself in someone else, which is such a like kind of bypassing the work. I think the thing that really got me with this journal is like, you can't skip the work. Like you really just can't. Then you try. And then you're like, why am I here again? And you're like, well, let me just try to skip one more time. Maybe this skip will be the skip that'll get me past it at work. And it just never is. But there is a level of inaction that might be required of you. And there's a level of action that might be required of you. And Jacqueline brought it masculine and feminine. And I, performer, would perform for love. My worth was tied to love. So my accolades were tied to love. My grades, I remember being like, I don't know why they don't like me. My resume is like really good. But like, what? Like, what does that have to do with the price of tea and joy? It means nothing about who you are. Like, what do you mean? And because I would tie all these things to my worth, I would just do all these things, make them really shiny, make you think that they look great, because I think if you think they look great, then you think I look great. And then all is well in the world until I'm like solely like so unaware of like my actual knowing. I don't know how to tap into it. I don't know how to find my own truth. I don't know what should be for me, action or inaction, right? And so the one thing that stood out to me in that process, I was like, okay, I'm doing a lot of masculine things, a lot of action, a lot of do, a lot of business, a lot of strategy, a lot of entrepreneur, girl boss, blazer stuff. And
Blaze.
she did the blazer. I love good. Yeah. Like the girl boss era, we were all like, yeah, I'm a girl boss, like whatever. And I realized, like, I was like, okay, I'm in a lot of masculine energy, but I had no idea, like, what that actually meant. But what I realized is that, like, masculine is the action, awareness is the feminine, and both of those two things married together is great balance. That's where you create change in your life. And so I love that we're talking about inaction here and then action here, because everyone's journey looks a little bit different in terms of what does integration look like for you, actually. So at the end of their journal, it talks about like replanting, right? Like you don't have to bloom where you're planted. And I know we all like love that quote back in like the MySpace days, like from the concrete a flower would bloom, whatever. And it's like, I mean, yeah, that's great. Like you made lemon out of lemonade, but like you don't actually have to bloom there. Like you can literally replant. If it's your environment, your friendships, if it's how you show up for yourself, like you can choose to like pull you up by the roots and then plant you somewhere else. And what does that look like in terms of community, family, support, friendship support? I know with like the girls on this panel, I shared with them, hey, this is what I'm working through. I'm working through codependency in every facet of my life, like everywhere. I'm working through like not people pleasing, not emotionally monitoring the room. Like, can you support me in that? There have been situations where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And Janay's like, do you really want to do that? Like, knowing that that's a people pleasing action. And because she loves me, she's holding me accountable So when we talk about replanting at the end of the journal, it's like, who do you need around you? What type of support do you need? What type of conversations with those people do you need to be like, hey, this is what I'm working through. If you ever see me emotionally monitor someone again in dance class, you can tell them, leave her alone or help her to her account bag. Like, you know, your smart girl better get it. What does that look like for you in terms of replanting? Did anything have to change in your community? How you showed up, who you asked for accountability in terms of like fostering a butterfly season that could like flourish, thrive, grow?
Like sustaining the growth.
Yes.
Yeah, with like my new. So once I established that the new coping mechanism that I wanted was to have difficult conversations while not self-abandoning, while still being able to maintain a sense of respect, I started like with my husband and having a difficult conversation with him. Like, that is what my safest space is. And so then from there, I can grow in spaces that may seem a little bit less safe, but now because I have the tools of, okay, well, I did that with my husband, and, you know, he didn't get mad. He didn't leave. He actually appreciated that I was honest and vulnerable. And we had a very vulnerable conversation yesterday. And I was like, whoa, Aisha, you know, before the journal, just talking about differences and beliefs and accepting each other's individual spiritual journeys, but not sort of diminishing the others, and understanding that each person's journey is individual and each person's revelation is individual. I wouldn't have been able to have that conversation with you maybe even 2 months ago, in fear that what if Aisha gets offended? Then we're in a weird spot. Then I don't want, then it's like, do I like her post on Instagram? You know? She's going to see that I'm kind of aware of what's going on, and I'm going to watch the stories really early. Like, all these things, right? The telenovela, right? And so starting with spaces that are the safest for me and allowing that to move outward is where I have taken that.
That's beautiful. To be proof that, like, you know,
Yeah, that I
are safe.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they won't leave.
Yeah.
And they won't get upset. And even if they do, I'm self-regulated enough to understand that if my truth upsets you, that is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about for you, Janay?
I think mine is similar to yours. My community, I think just like knowing exactly what I'm working on and being honest and saying, hey, I won't get offended if you flag this for me, because sometimes my blinders are on and I'm like, it's everyone else and really it's a me thing. But typically it doesn't even get to that point because my husband is the first to be like, that ain't got nothing to do with you. Like, let it go. So I think he's like a good gut check for me before it even like becomes real.
Yeah. Jacqueline, what about for you?
Yeah. I think it was different for me because mine was so much of inaction. So every time I would catch myself trying to excel. I was like, how can I unexcel in this moment right now? How can we rein it back? So a lot of my new coping mechanisms are so soft, way more soft than it's ever been, where if I was like, oh, I'm just going to go to the gym and like burn it out, I'm actually going to like lay on the couch with a blanket and like self-soothe, that way. So it was so much opposite of what I was used to. And that was probably the hardest part. But when it comes to the people around me, since I moved to Arizona, which has been about a year and a half since I moved here, I have grown exponentially. And I realized the importance of having friends that really show you awareness and challenge you and help you grow. Because I've had friends around me my whole life, had a lot of friends, and I never felt like I was growing. I always felt like, okay, I want to go somewhere, but it's not there. So having those friends that actually say, no, I don't want to people please you. I want to show you what's possible right now and elevate you and challenge you, even though in the moment, sometimes it doesn't feel good, is so powerful. So I would say the community and the support around that, and then also being able to voice that I need to rest right now, or I need this space right now. I'm moving slow. And just so you know, that's the awareness around it, and ask for support.
That's beautiful. I want to close with this final question. And it is, whatever version of yourself, what would you tell her, previous version of yourself, what would you tell her? And I'll kind of explain the intention behind it. So I was doing a podcast actually with Janay's husband, and we had talked about this, and we were like, you know, what would you tell a previous version of yourself? What would they need to hear? And I feel like, you know, I am like, love microdosing. Feel like it's a really great tool to like just trap the trauma, bring it up, and then you can deal with it and integrate it. It's been really great for me. And I feel like a lot of things that have come through have been like poetic and prophetic. Like it's never like, do this action item. It's always like, I don't even know, what would this look like if this happened? And then it leads me to the action item. Very like Gandhi-ish, guru-ish. Like I'm not going to give you the full thing. You can hunt for this, then you find it, and then you apply it, right? And when it comes to what I would tell myself is a previous version of myself, I would tell her, like, you don't have to give it all away. Like, and what does that mean? You don't have to people please and just give, because I'm tying my worth to what I think you think about me. So I'm going to give you every single thing and then be resentful at you because I don't feel like you valued it enough to what I gave, but you actually only asked for one thing, right? And so you don't have to give it all away. I don't have to give it all away in dance class when someone else is uncomfortable. I don't have to give it all away by like emotionally monitoring the room, trying to control coping mechanisms. I don't have to give all of this stuff always away because my worth is intrinsic. And when people see the value in you, like you can have a really beautiful equal energy exchange. And so when I realized that that was what I would tell myself, I'm like, oh, that's why it's like poetic, because the thing that you would tell yourself needs to be able to apply to a lot of areas of your life. And so if you just give like one action item, then you're in a new scenario. It's like, well, this doesn't fit anymore. And so when you guys think about the previous versions of you, pre-journal, this new sense of awareness, what would you tell that version of you? Does anyone want to go first?
Yeah. I'll go first. I would say to her, you already know. Like you already have the answer inside of you. You don't have to seek anyone's advice. You don't have to look for the answer. For me, like I trust God and his plans for me. And the part of it that goes out of alignment is when I start to trust other people that aren't him or aren't myself, or start taking guidance from people who aren't him or aren't myself. So I would just go with, it's all inside. Yeah, that's beautiful. Go to finish.
Conflict is not scary. It is necessary and it is integral to a healthy and balanced relationship, whether romantic, whether familial, whether parental. A false sense of short-term peace is not worth like long-term, authentic relationship.
That's beautiful. Hey, close us out.
Oh God. Probably you don't have to abandon yourself to feel loved.
Like, why does it make me want to cry? Can you guys give a round of applause to these ladies who like share them?
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for being vulnerable. I know it's not really easy to like pour your heart out on the table and tell everyone like, this is where I fucked up in life. Sorry for my trauma, Dom. I appreciate you guys all for being here, showing up, laughing, and like just allowing us to pour into you guys and you guys energetically pouring back into us. I'm so grateful. It's my very first live event, my first like solo event in a space where I feel like I'm not trying to earn love. And so it's so special to me that you guys are here and just being in that energy with me. So thank you.
Thank you.